Greetings. Welcome to ITR Live. I'm your host, Chris Hagenow. We are back here in Studio 130 for another fun-filled, action-packed episode of Iowa's favorite conservative podcast. We've got John Hendrickson and Sarah Curry in studio today. Welcome to the two of you.
Thank you.
It's a nice, cold day.
Yeah, it is. I'm really excited to have you both here. We got a lot of snow. We dug out. Got more on the way. It's finally winter, John.
It is, yeah.
Does that make you feel better about being in Iowa?
Yeah, it feels more like home.
Feels more like home.
Yeah.
And finally have snow back home too, I hope.
They do, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
good.
Yep.
So it's not just us.
No.
Okay.
No.
We try to give folks an update on the winter conditions
That's
on
right.
the Iron Range.
Yeah, and it's finally below zero up there. So, I mean, it's good
Well,
news for ice fishermen. So.
Yeah. So, and Sarah had to brave the weather to get here too, as our listeners know, is not a native to Central Iowa.
It was only a 3.5 hour drive at 10 and 2.
That should take 2 hours, right? So it's almost
my shoulders are really sore after making it.
You're
but
white knuckling it down I-80.
I did. I came in Monday night because I didn't want to drive on Tuesday. And
so Sarah's so committed to the podcast, John, that she didn't just come in a day before. She came in 2 days early to make sure she would not miss her appearance on the ITR Live podcast.
Yes.
Well, all joking.
This is the gold standard.
The gold standard in Iowa conservative podcast.
That's right.
Well, I've got to work that in the opening, John, because I don't know why I haven't landed on that. It's just kind of habit, the way it sits. The welcome to the gold standard in Iowa conservative podcast. That's it. Why did it take us this long?
We are the flagship program.
Both of those guys.
Yeah.
You know what?
Yeah.
Today is the day when I finally just turn the reins over.
Yeah.
You're now the host, and I'll just sit and just kind of have stuff to say. I think we just need it. We need to flip it. So, well, good. What we want to try and accomplish today is sort of a rapid reaction to the opening of the legislative session. And the three of us had the opportunity last night to go to the governor's condition of the state address. We braved the snow to get out there. There were a few empty seats in the House gallery, which was disappointing, but it was tough out there. Now, I will, to continue on the levity for just a little bit, John, is to get to the governor's condition of the state, is that you had to have me come pick you up.
Yes, yeah.
You're the one that drives an F-150, and you're the one from northern Minnesota, and yet I had to come pick you up to get through the snow. I just want to make sure our listeners are perfectly clear on that.
I fully admit I'm a coward when it comes to winter driving.
Okay. And the Southern girl braved the snow. And it's all good, John. We love you.
Remind our listeners where you are a native.
Oh, I'm from North Carolina, and I went to college in Louisiana.
Yeah.
So our winters are 40 degrees and raining.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. So anyway, all right. So the three of us assembled. We made it last night, and I think that was the first time for either of you having been to a condition of the state address or sort of an official proceeding, I guess, in the House. And I mean, just overall, what were your perspectives, John? What were your perspectives of the evening?
It was really exciting. I found it very interesting. One, just to be in the building. I mean, I've been to the Capitol before, but this was my first time to actually sit in the galleries, and it was just fun to watch the proceedings go on, the action on the floor before it started, and then the whole ceremony, just bringing in the distinguished guests and the governor herself. And so just to be part of that, I mean, you watch them on TV, but to be there live and in person is just a special experience. So I appreciate that you bringing us. So.
Well, I think you should thank Governor Reynolds for sending the invitation to the organization to bring some of our folks. I don't know that I had much to do with it, but Sarah, what they...
You know, I've worked in a couple different state capitals, and every time I go in Iowa, it's just so beautiful. And I was actually sitting there thinking, wow, like the history, like think about people were sitting here 100 years ago listening to the condition of the state. And here we are doing it today. So, I know I get kind of politically nerded out when I get and stuff like that. And so it was just fun. It was fun, like seeing everybody come in and fun being there and seeing the TV cameras and just kind of seeing the behind the scenes stuff. And then it was fun kind of watching you in your element and like hanging out with everybody, and his eyes just light up when he walks in that building. It's awesome.
I don't know whether to say thank you or to but I still like anybody. I love the building. And I love the action in there. And if there's one thing that I really still kind of miss about that is you walk in the building and you're on, and it's fast paced. And I suppose if you try to withdraw from that, you can, but it's fast paced from the time you get in until you leave. And there can be some long days and long nights and all that, but I really do like that, the energy that's in the building, kind of like what you said. There's always something.
It's just fun because I feel like John and I sit behind the computer and we talk about policy and we do kind of the heavy crunching, but when you get in the building, it just brings it all to life, and it's real and it's fun, and it's why we do this.
I agree with all of that. I was kind of explaining to you, I sat in that room for 12 years in the House chamber, and it's shiny and it's majestic and it's impressive and all the pomp and circumstance. Early in session, everything's still polished up. They really do a lot of work too. They drop those giant chandeliers and they dust them and polish them and all the railings. They really do a lot of work to make that place special. But look around it. It was always, I would sit back and think, wow, I get to come to work in this place. That's really cool. And I had a new thought. So sometimes you'd count the light bulbs in the ceiling in those long floor debates or all the different things that you might do to pass the time on the. Last night I had a new one that I had never contemplated before, which is what kind of wood are all the desks and the trim made out of in the Capitol building, and I don't know. So if any of our listeners are veterans of the Capitol and enjoy woodworking or wood, I would love somebody to tell me what some of that is. Now I know that there are many different kinds of marble that were used in all the trim inside the House chamber. There's a whole other bit of history that folks know about that building. It's pretty cool. Okay, so getting down to business. So we had heard on Monday from the way it works when you come into session is you gavel in on the opening day and the legislative leaders all give a speech. And so then there's other organizational work. And then the governor's condition of the state would then be yesterday, which as we're recording this will be on Tuesday. And at that point, then you've kind of heard from everyone at the beginning of session of what they intend to do. So it's usually the high points of what these individual leaders of the governor want to tackle during the session. And I don't know that a lot of it is necessarily surprising because they've been doing interviews and whatnot leading up to the session, but I'd kind of like to go through some of this. And I'm going to start by going through the governor and both Speaker Grassley and Majority Leader Whitver on taxes, because I think all three of them had some good things to say. And so we're gonna go through this, but I think we should start with last night with Governor Reynolds from her speech, and here's some excerpts of that.
Our most recent income tax bill established a flat rate of 3.9% set to phase in gradually until finally taking effect in 2026. As always, it was an aggressive, growth-oriented policy on a responsible, conservative timeline. But once again, opponents said that letting Iowans keep more of their money would break the government. One left-leaning group called it a recipe for disaster. Well, that was wrong. 2 years later, it's clear we're well positioned to go further, faster. Even with the tax cuts we've already delivered, state revenue continues to grow, ending the year with a $1.83 billion surplus and more than $900 million in reserve funds. Let me be absolutely clear. The surplus does not mean that we aren't spending enough. It means we're still taking too much of Iowa's hard-earned money. So tonight, I'm proposing a bill that reduces the income tax rate to a flat 3.65% while allowing it to take effect this year, retroactive to January 1st. The following year, in 2025, the rate would fall again to a flat 3.5%.
Okay, John, what's your perspective on, I guess, two things that I want to hear from both of you. Perspective on tax policy in general. We've talked a lot about this governor's background on tax policy and this particular proposal.
Yeah, I think it's very good, and she absolutely, I think, set the stage for why we're doing this today. And for example, it is because of conservative budgeting, prudent budgeting, that we're able to do these pro-growth tax cuts. And we've seen this with the recent REC and what was it, December. And, we've been running budget surpluses the last several years. The reserve accounts are full. It has swelled the taxpayer relief fund. So it is because of that we can engage. And certainly I think the governor is right to expedite and accelerate the rate reductions and then to go even further. And so I think she set up a pretty good plan as a good starting point here in the session.
Yeah. Sarah.
I mean, everything John said is spot on. I really like the idea of accelerating it. We've got a lot of money. The taxpayer relief fund is just kind of sitting there, and it's sort of tempting to say, let's spend it on something else. And it's intended for tax relief. And,
yes.
and the state is safe. We've got everything's fully funded. So I think the acceleration is really good. A lot of people are watching the revenue reports very closely. So I don't think anything would get out of control. It was a calculated, well thought out, conservative move. And Iowans, I think, they have heard us talk about these tax cuts for so long, and we haven't realized a lot of it yet. And so I think by speeding it up, and one thing I like, she was going to make it retroactive to January 1. So it would affect withholdings and stuff. And so I think when people are struggling, I know, my grocery bill's gone up. So it would really help a lot, I think, and it would help a lot of Iowans to see those savings now instead of having to wait until 2026.
Mm-hmm. I think I have heard that fairly consistently certainly from the governor's speech last night, and I think from both House and Senate leaders, is that the accelerate part of the tax cuts would be for tax year 24 that we're in now. So once they pass this bill, the paychecks that we're earning today, right now, would be taxed ultimately at a lower rate. And I think that's great. So, John, you had recently republished the ITR Foundation report on where a roadmap for tax reform, and it was accelerate, lower, and eliminate.
Yes, yeah.
And so Governor Reynolds here, clearly wants to accelerate, and we have the money, with the taxpayer relief fund to do that, lowering from 3.9 to 3.5, and hopefully a little further. I know there was some comments from Leader Whitver that we'll talk a little bit more, but that the Senate may want to go further than 3.5. And we haven't heard yet a number from House Republicans, but so lowering is certainly something that we should look for happening. It's just a matter of hopefully how far we go with that. The eliminate, and I still want to get to Whitver and Grassley. We haven't heard on yet, but may still be some. So they're still on the Hendrickson plan.
Yes, yeah.
More or less, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yep.
Okay.
That's the gold standard plan too.
The Hendrickson plan is going to be the gold standard plan. Okay, I want to move on. I've got a real treat for you, John. Here, this is gonna because I don't know if you picked up on this. So, we're gonna move on to Speaker Grassley's opening day comments, and just a couple of thoughts because I want you. I think you'll appreciate this. So, this is Speaker Grassley on Monday.
Bidenomics has hit Iowans' pocketbooks hard. House Republicans want to deliver relief that Iowans can feel as soon as possible. If you've come to know anything about my time in the legislature or House Republican caucus, you know that any tax proposal that we are a part of will be sustainable. It'll have long-term impacts and will be very forward-thinking. So I think this session, we need to look at speeding up those previously passed tax cuts to provide relief for Iowans as soon as possible. Our counterparts in Minnesota Capitol Building are making Iowa an even more appealing place to live, work, and raise a family and run a business. This session will explore policies that further incentivize businesses currently stuck in states like Minnesota who take their policy cues from California to bring their businesses' employees here to Iowa, where they will have the freedom to grow and thrive and raise their families.
Yeah, it's it pains me to hear that, but I mean it's right. I mean this is the consequence of what Governor Walz and the DFL legislature have done up there. Is they're driving people out of the state, and it's going to be to Iowa's benefit and South Dakota's benefit as people look for a better tax climate. I mean, tax climate isn't the only factor of people moving, but it's certainly a huge factor. And so I think, Leader Whitver made a great statement comparing Iowa and Minnesota that maybe we can get to. But at the same time, I think Speaker Grassley is right that we don't, we always pointed to Illinois, but now our neighbor to the north, Minnesota, has become even more radical, both from an economic and social perspective. And I hate to say it, it pains me to say it, but we don't want to follow that example. It's a disaster, and that state is going to suffer as a result.
To piggyback off that, living on the western side of the state, I hear a lot of the Nebraska news, and I will tell you, Governor Pillen and the Nebraska legislature, they are just like, what is Iowa doing? We have to keep in line. We have to follow, because, I mean, there's a lot of people from Omaha that have already moved to the Council Bluffs or, Council Bluffs metro area, taking advantage of lower property taxes, lower income taxes. And so they are watching everything. And so, yes, Minnesota, we're the more conservative option there, but I think we're also the leader. I don't know if Missouri is going to try to follow suit and stuff, but I think it's a good thing. People are watching, and we are a leader. I think for a lot of times Iowa was a follower, and we've definitely switched that.
I think that's a great point. It just proves that there is this fiscal competitiveness among the states, and it matters. And I think one thing is whether it's the governor or Speaker Grassley or Leader Whitver, all seem to understand that Iowa can't be complacent, that we have to keep going.
I want to move on, well, not necessarily move on to this point of the comparison, because, John, as you mentioned, here's Leader Whitver on Minnesota.
While Iowa has passed measured increases in state spending, our neighbors to the north have struggled quite a bit with that concept. Minnesota Democrats have their own trifecta, and they used it to grow their budget by 38%. But a 38% budget increase wasn't enough for Minnesota liberals. They passed a $1 billion bonding package. Then they signed into law $2.2 billion in additional tax increases, even with historic surpluses in their state. The contrast between the positive news from the Iowa revenue estimating projection and Minnesota's is clear. Iowa is projected to have a surplus of roughly $2.8 billion in fiscal year 2025, while Minnesota's revenue estimating panel projected a $2.3 billion deficit in 2025. So much rhetoric has been spilled in this building accusing Republicans of turning Iowa into the next Kansas. I think the much bigger and much more real danger is for states becoming the next Minnesota.
He's absolutely right, and I never thought about it that way until I read his remarks. And because you always hear the left saying Iowa's going to be the next Kansas, and we talked about when the governor was interviewed by The Economist, and our opponent on the other side, Mr. Owen, had said, this is going to lead to a disaster and blow a hole in the budget. But what Leader Whitver said is absolutely right. It's easy for the left to say we need to fully fund all these things, and and no one ever calls them on it. But Minnesota and California are two examples of taxing and spending, and they're both running deficits right now. And their fiscal foundation is not in good shape. And so, we always hear from the media about criticizing tax cuts. That's irresponsible, but they never look at what's going on in these blue states. And I think I really liked how Leader Whitver phrased that, because, that it shows that model is just not working.
So, and I think that's all great. We've got great leadership there on the budget side and on the tax side. Sarah, you noted this morning before we went on air here that there was no discussion of property taxes or local government issues. Now, maybe it's just an income tax year. Last year was a property tax year, but there are some things that you would you would still like to see done this year, right? Now, they may not have risen to the level of condition of the state address, but you have a couple things that you would very much like to get done, right?
Yeah. I mean, the condition of the state was very broad. It was very high level, state issues. Makes sense, condition of the state. But, our local governments are the foundation. That's where government starts in Iowa. And so I really think that there needs to be a focus on local government and property taxes. Now, there might be, and she just didn't include it in the speech. I'm hopeful that we'll see some bills come out later on. One thing that I would really like to see, we had a huge improvement where we have direct notification for local bonding now, and we have those bonds moved to a November election. I heard from a lot of citizens how happy they were just to know that the bond was coming because they don't follow their local media or their, local papers. But then I heard from others saying, well, there was a debt service levy increase or there was a PEPL levy increase, and I didn't know about that. I would have voted if I had known about that because that's a property tax increase. And so what I would like to see is that direct notification policy carry over to any direct property tax increases that you have to ask voters for. So they're just aware of it. If you don't move those to November because there's not enough room on the ballot or for whatever reason, that's fine. I'll accept that. But I think if you're going to have a March or September win election and you're going to raise property taxes, you should have more voter engagement with that. And a direct notification works, and if they want to raise taxes, they can pay for the postage to let them know. The other thing I'd like to see is, I'm the nerd, so I like to look into government debt, because that's what we all do in our spare time. And right now, so the Iowa Constitution, when it was drafted in the mid-1800s, said that local governments have a 5% cap on the debt that they can issue. And over time, our finance has gotten a lot more creative. And so that was based on what's called general obligation debt, because if they default, then the taxpayer's on the hook for that. Well, there's different types of debt, like urban renewal debt that local governments can issue, and it's a simple vote of the board. The taxpayers have no idea about this. Another thing is revenue bonds. So if it's paid for with local option sales tax or some other form of revenue that's not property tax, that also bypasses the voters. And that also is not subject to that 5% cap. And I have a problem with that because, a day of reckoning is coming for these local governments that keep spending. And, I hate to say it, but we've got some really great examples of Minnesota in our local governments across Iowa. And so they keep borrowing and borrowing and borrowing above this 5% because they get to, work around it. And I would like to see all debt, regardless of how it's paid, within that 5% cap, just to protect taxpayers. And so, sorry, I get a little passionate when it comes to that stuff, but those are two things. I don't think they make the level of the condition of the state. They're kind of small and policy wonky, but I think they're very important. And I think those are two issues I would like to see come up in session this year.
Good. Well, we will elevate those for sure as we're talking with legislative leaders, Senator Dawson. We'll try and elevate those issues. So, I want to kind of wrap this all up with I guess is what I was originally gonna put up here from Leader Whitver, just to frame up, because I think all three of these, both the House, the Senate, and the governor all sort of share the same mission through all of this. And because I do think that Leader Whitver sums this up pretty well.
This legislative session, we are going to stay focused on the path forward, making Iowa a model for other states. We'll expedite the tax cuts so Iowans can keep more of their money sooner. We'll condense the number of income tax brackets, making taxes simpler and fairer. And we will responsibly manage our budget to focus on the necessities and maintain the principle of putting Iowa taxpayers first, not the government. We will continue to pursue reforms by reviewing the hundreds of boards and commissions populating state government. The goal is to make government more efficient and help Iowans get to work faster. In one sentence, here's the plan. Cut taxes, control spending, reform government, and let Iowans be great. Let's get to work.
I kind of like that at the end, the let Iowans be great, because I think that's really what we're trying to do is let individuals be the best they can be. And it's better than having government lead the way.
Yeah. We're so blessed here in Iowa because our counterparts at other think tanks in states like California, Minnesota, Illinois, they're sitting around the table right now saying, okay, what can we stop? How do we stop the bad stuff? And here in Iowa, we're sitting around the table like, well, this is really good. How do we keep the good stuff rolling? And what other good stuff can we do? And so I think we're in a really, really fortunate situation that we have leaders that understand what Iowans want. They understand how to grow our economy and to just help Iowa be a great state. And that's a really fun situation to be in, because when all you're doing is blocking and tackling bad policy, it really gets old and it's exhausting. But when you get to see wins and you get to see your state, up there and noticed on that national scale, it's fun, and it's really, really great work. I don't know. What do you think, John?
I agree. In fact, a lot of times when our colleagues from other think tanks talk to us and they say, how is Iowa getting all this done? And it would be nice if we could take credit for it, but I always say the credit goes to, because we have an exceptional leaders right now in Governor Reynolds and the legislature, and Leader Whitver and the things that the legislature have done. And they, the other thing is they deliver on what they say they're going to do. And so we're not only getting good conservative policies, but they're telling the voters, here's what we're going to do, and they're fulfilling those promises. And I think that's why you see Republicans being reelected overwhelmingly in Iowa right now, because they're delivering.
I appreciate you guys wanting to be able to take organizational bragging rights on the national stage with different think tanks. I'm a little more selfish. I just want to keep more of my dollars. I just want more money in my pocket. So, but I mean, that's great. That's a nice benefit, but I just, it's about me first. So, but anyway.
Well, really, it's because they're all jealous.
You guys are true believers. I'm more self-interested, but
they all want to live in Iowa.
That they do.
And then they see our snowstorms. They're like, maybe not.
Yeah, no, you always have to second guess things a little bit when you're plowing 2 feet of global warming out of the end of your driveway.
I've talked to people in other states who, they have Republican governors and Republican legislatures, and they're just as frustrated as if they're in a blue state.
Yeah.
And so, we're very fortunate to have the leadership that we do.
I've worked in 2 other states that, Republican control at times during my tenure, and a lot of them would say what people wanted them to hear just so they could get reelected or they get the soundbite, but they didn't actually do it. They didn't put their neck out there because they didn't want to lose reelection, or they had aspirations for higher office. And I tell you what, in Iowa, when they say it, they do it. Mm-hmm. And if they don't get it accomplished, it's not because they didn't try. And I appreciate that. And I think that's one of the reasons why Iowa is doing so well, is because those leaders aren't saying, well, what about the next election? And I hope they all like me. They're like, no, this is the right thing to do, and we're going to do it. And if you don't like it, go pound sand, because this is the right thing.
I think that's actually a good place to kind of wrap it up, is that I get asked regularly, well, why do you think that Kim Reynolds put this piece in her speech? Or why do you think she's doing that? It's always like there's some hidden agenda. And I think, no, usually the answer is because that's what she thinks, is the right thing to do. Yeah, agree or disagree, she's doing it because that's what she wants to do. Yeah. And so I think that's, and they are believers in tax reform.
Yeah, and I know Leader Whitver says quite a bit, we're not going to waste our majority. Yeah. And I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, they're, as I said, they're delivering.
Yep. Well, that's great. And long may it continue. And we're going to be here to support them, to get information, to help encourage, and inevitably this year there's going to be proposals that go the opposite direction. Mm-hmm. And we hope that most of them do not move forward, but we'll be there to kind of say, hey, wait a minute, this is kind of moves the opposite direction from what everybody's trying to do. So
could I just bring up just 2 quick points from the speech last night? And they're not ITR issues, but and this is just from my...
here we go. No, John's got to do it. He's just, we can't.
This is just from my perspective, but I thought the governor brought up 2 important issues. One was the border. I mean, it's a national crisis, and
she had across the gallery from us were I don't know, a pretty good contingent of folks from the Iowa National Guard that had been on that deployment to the border.
Yeah, and illegal immigration, even though Iowa's not on the border, illegal immigration and the drugs and trafficking that flows through that still impacts Iowa. So I was glad the governor brought that up, and I'm glad she contributed to trying to help secure the border. The other thing is, I think it's a huge issue, is she wants to propose legislation to tighten up foreign ownership of land, especially in terms of communist China. And she had a great line. Let's let's make sure that America's soil remains in American hands. And I think this is such a crucial issue right now because just the enormous threat that China has, and just in another issue that has come up is one of our historic corporations, U.S. Steel, is going to be bought out by a Japanese firm. And,
I hadn't heard that one.
And I it's caused a lot of debate about whether this is a good idea or not. And I think we need to have greater scrutiny on foreign entities buying and whether it's land.
I think we should, as that proposal moves forward, I trust that you're going to spend quite a bit of time analyzing that and thinking on it. And where I think I begin on that issue is the national security impact. We can have a debate about the economics of it, and there will be one. And I'm thinking about the U.S. Steel kind of thing. But is it in our national security interest to have a domestic U.S.-owned steel industry? And I suspect that it probably is. Good. Well, we couldn't get off the podcast without John talking about trade policy and immigration.
That's right, yeah.
So it's all good. Well, we are way over time, which is a good thing because we covered a lot of ground. So I want to thank both of you for coming in. It was a great 48 hours, I think, to just kind of watch all this stuff to get up to the Capitol. And I know we've got a lot of work now ahead of us to get all this ready to go. So, and
I have a lot of work because there's more snow in the forecast, and I still got to drive back to Western
Iowa. Yeah, you got to get back. So anyway, with that all having been said, thank you for all your work. And hopefully we can reconvene with the three of us again sometime soon. And with all of that, that's all we got for today. And we'll see you next time on ITR Live.